Hello, I'm Rosie Hardy. This is Rosie Hardy Gardening. We had a lot of questions this month, so let's carry on and finish them off. You may notice I'm in a slightly different location, happen to be in Vancouver, so doesn't make any difference to how I answer the questions. Here we go. Hello, I have a baby rose struggling with black spot. It was a bare root and I had it in a pot. It's defoliated, fed it, come back, healthy leaves, then it got attacked by thrips. Now I can see black spot again and it has a bud. Well, the answer is you've got it in a container, you are feeding it, that's absolutely fine. If it's got a bud on it, yes, take the bud off. Because to be honest, if you've got a bud on there, whenever they use energy to flower, it's more energy sapping from the plant itself. You want it to grow properly. So basically disbud it. I would say if you're not in a really very cold situation, then leave it in the container outside and allow it to just defoliate as it would do, because it's not an evergreen. And then in the spring, pot it up into something else or put it out in the garden if that's where you want it to go. And then make sure it gets well fed. Keep on making sure that it is well fed, and then that should be better. The better fed it is, the more it's actively growing. As it's growing, if it's getting a little bit too big, give it a little bit of a tidy up prune and it should be perfectly fine. Any black spot leaves that you do see, do not allow to go onto the ground. Get rid of those, bag them and bin them. Hi Rosie, I took your advice about taking tip cuttings of dahlias, growing really well. Should I feed them and water them continually through the winter, or do they need a dormant period? This is where I would say stop watering and feeding and do allow them to go dormant, because they again would be better by being defoliated and just allowing the small tubers that have grown to go dormant. And then in the spring, once the light levels get better, you can start to water and feed them, get them growing and pot them up. Hello Rosie, I want to ask you about pruning young lavender plants which I've got in containers. These are only small, so they're about 6 inches across, so they're not very big, they're obviously young ones. Should I be cutting them back right the way down, or should I just be trimming them over? I would say if they are just young plants like that, just literally give them a tidy up. So get rid of any dead flower stems and cut a little bit so that they're just a tight round shape. And then in the spring, when you see them actively starting to grow, that is when you can take them down much lower. You'll see all the lovely beautiful growth at the base and cut them down to that. Hi Rosie, could you please recommend a few medium-sized perennials, somewhere around 20 to 30 inches, that is somewhere around about 45 to 60 centimeters tall, that can be planted in containers in a shady spot. The majority of perennial plants that go in shady spots can be grown in containers, so therefore you could grow hostas, epimediums, hellebores, really easy to grow there. Amsonia are another good choice. Then perhaps 1 or 2 of the smaller growing shade loving shrubs such as sarcococca or even cornus can grow really well in containers in a shady spot. Hi Rosie, should I cut back the spent flowers on my Allium lavender bubbles to preserve energy for flowering next year? I noticed you saving seeds. Do they come true from seed? Let's answer the one about seed first. If you take Allium seed from species, then yes, they come true to seed. If you take seed from something that is named, you can get all sorts of different plants coming up. Sometimes it's worthwhile, sometimes it isn't. The answer to taking the flowers, spent flowers, off your Allium lavender bubbles is that yes, you can. Quite often you can leave the seed heads there until such time as they drop off it. It's not going to make that much difference. It's really aesthetics and it's up to you. Hi Rosie, I may be moving next spring. I'd like to take some plants from my garden. Do I lift them in the autumn and pot them up and keep them in pots over winter, or do I leave it until the spring? I have a heavy clay soil. I would suggest if you've got spring flowering stuff, then very much lift it now, put it into containers, but any of the late season stuff I would do in the spring. Hello Rosie, what is your options on peat-free? What do you do? And Is there anything that I dare say is cheap? And my experience has been awful, remembering watering for my daughter, how it's difficult to keep the water correct in the pots, etc. Well, as a nursery person who has been peat-free for the last 12 years, I can say that we have got to grips with how we actually work with peat-free. You have to change the way that you do your watering. What you have to remember is that the top looks dry, but when you put your finger down into the pots, you'll find it's actually really quite moist at the bottom. Now, we use Melcourt compost at the nursery. We do use other compost in our propagation from different companies. Depending on where you are in the world, you just need to find somebody who has got a good bark-based compost. Those seem to be the best forms. The thing you have to remember with the bark-based ones is that you might need to use a little bit more in the way of fertilizer with them, because obviously the bark will absorb a little bit of the nitrogen out of the fertilizer as it breaks down a bit more. But those seem to be the best. So little and often watering is the best way with those types of compost. And if you can put a mulch over the top, if you're growing in containers, put a little mulch over the top, you will find that they actually stay really quite moist for a long time. I'm a seed sowing novice. Last spring I had a go at sowing Salvia caradonna. Who knew they'd easily germinate? Some of them have come to be really tall, some of them are small. They don't look very good, they haven't died, but they're still quite small plants. What should I do? Now the answer to this is that Salvia caradonna is a named plant, and therefore you are not going to necessarily get seed that is true to type, because that is what's known as seedling variation. So some of your plants will become true, like Salvia caradonna, and as you have noticed, some of them will be really small, and those are really not worth it unless you have something that is interesting, a different colour. I would just ditch the ones that are small, grow on the other ones and just see how they do. If you want true Salvia caradonna year after year after year, then division is the best way forward. Hi Rosie, I have an oriental poppy, Royal Wedding, that's a beautiful one, and I can't figure out the best way to prop it up and keep it upright, because occasionally the flowers go down and then they get all bendy, and doing it cane by cane on the flowers is a little bit difficult. I fully understand that. Oriental poppies can be a little bit wayward, as you say, when they flop over, and there's so much foliage and then you miss it as the flowers actually come up. I would suggest something like the people who are growing professionally for flower cutting, and that is that they use netting or square mesh wire, and you put it at a level and the plant grows through, and then you raise it up. So if you can do it so that you've got some stakes, make a cage about 4 canes wide, put a couple of layers, 3 or 4 layers of square metal wire over that, tie it onto the canes or the stakes that you've got there, and then as the plant grows up, raise them up and then raise them again. That way you get this level and the flowers go through, the leaf goes through, and you'll have so much foliage that you won't actually notice, especially if you use something that is either green mesh or even galvanized mesh, and that is a really easy way of getting the whole lot to stand up, and it will all grow through perfectly well. Hi Rosie, I've propagated 5 eastern redbuds from seed. I brought them indoors because of frost warning. We're in Ontario, zone 5B. How do I overwinter them? For those who don't know what redbud is, it is Cercis, and Cercis is a fabulous tree which has amazing pink flowers in the spring. It's just lovely, sometimes also known as the Judas tree. Now, if you've got young ones and you're having them inside and overwintering them, then very much put them somewhere where they are probably frost-free, a little bit of light, and also do not overwater. That is the key thing, because once you get into darker days, and they are also going to become dormant, so they're going to lose their leaves because they are deciduous, just leave them relatively dry. And then as soon as the light levels start to pick up and you can see that they're looking as though they're wanting to grow, start watering them gently, give them a bit of food and maybe pot them on. How to overwinter geranium roseanne? Now this is a question which is quite interesting to me, because to be honest, geranium roseanne is a hardy geranium. So this is where people are getting very confused about what is a hardy geranium and what are geraniums, as in bedding geraniums, pelargoniums. And this is where people get confused, because you get sold bedding geraniums, and those are the things which you have to overwinter carefully, keep frost free, whereas hardy geraniums just live out all year round and you don't have to worry about them. Hardy geraniums such as geranium roseanne in a pot, just leave it outside, give it a little bit of a haircut back if you want to, but you can leave all of the old foliage there until the spring, then cut it back. You'll see it coming through. It is quite late to reappear from ground level, probably about the end of April, beginning of May, and then it will start off again and be really good, and you can either pot it up into a larger pot or put it into the ground. Hi Rosie, I've taken fuchsia cuttings. Should I keep them in the shed, conservatory or greenhouse? Do I have to water them during the winter? Also, my rose cuttings already have leaves sprouting. Where should I store them? And should I water these during the winter? If you have a greenhouse, then that will be the best place for you to be storing both of these, the fuchsia and the rose cuttings, by far the best place. Make sure that it is as insulated as it can be, but that you also ventilate it through the winter months. And then make sure that you do not overwater these cuttings. Once a month at the most. Your roses will probably defoliate once the light levels get too low, so don't worry about that, they're not dying. The fuchsia may also do exactly the same, so keep them moist but not absolutely soaking wet. As I say, about once a month watering will be absolutely fine. Thank you very much for watching, and please do subscribe to the channel.